The content of this podcast has not been evaluated by Health Canada or the FDA. It is educational in nature and should not be taken as medical advice. Always consult a qualified medical professional to see if a diet, lifestyle change, or supplement is right for you. Any supplements mentioned are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. Please note that the opinions of the guests or hosts are their own and may not reflect those of Advanced Orthomolecular Research Incorporated. Welcome to Supplementing Health, a podcast presented by Advanced Orthomolecular Research. We are all about applying evidence-based and effective dietary, lifestyle, and natural health product strategies for your optimal health. In each episode, we will feature very engaging clinicians and experts from the world of functional and naturopathic medicine to help achieve our mission to empower people to live their best lives naturally. Welcome to Supplementing Health. Today we will be discussing Still's disease with Ron Morante and how his diagnosis led to the inception of bone-in food. Thanks for joining me today, Ron.
Thank you for having me.
So Still's disease is a rare form of inflammatory arthritis. Would you mind sharing a little bit about your diagnosis for people who may not be familiar and where you were at when you got that diagnosis?
Sure. This was about 7 years ago. I was diagnosed with Still's disease through exemption, basically meaning I started to have these autoimmune conditions, and doctors, I had seen 7 specialists, couldn't diagnose me any other way than through how I responded to medication and prescription. It started with very high fevers, joint issues and flare-ups, to the point where after 30 days my wife was helping me out of bed. It was a pretty serious condition, and it was very concerning. Long story short, I continued on with my medications and prescriptions until I sought a more naturopathic, homeopathic way of doing so through food, which has led us on our path today.
And was there like a pivotal moment in your experience that made you decide now is the time to kind of go that more natural route?
Yeah, they had thrown me on very high dosages of corticosteroids, prednisone, about 80 milligrams a day, which is 75 milligrams more than what is acceptable for the human body on a long-term basis. The reason it became very severe was it eventually attacked my heart. So where it started in all my joints and, created extreme fatigue and, I had lost about 35 pounds, it started to affect the pericardium, which is the sac that protects my heart. And it started to flare up. And fortunately enough for me, it flared outwards. So it really just affected my breathing. That was when a rheumatologist, the 7 specialists I had seen, threw me on high doses of prednisone, and because of the way that I responded within 24 hours, they were able to diagnose me. But then I was forced onto those prescriptions indefinitely by my rheumatologist, because we had to control this inflammation around my heart to limit the scar tissue that was creating. Every time I started weaning myself off the drugs within months, periods, it extended about 2 or 3 years. Every time I tried to wean myself off those drugs, my heart would flare back up again. So they threw me on biologic treatments, which were new to the market, not covered by insurance, which really wreaked havoc on me and my wife and our family future. Was when I decided to, was when I realized like maybe I needed to make a lifestyle change.
And you had mentioned that kind of all of this was at the onset of traveling. Do you travel a lot? And have you pulled any, food and nutrition habits from other cultures along the way?
Yes, I did travel a lot. Definitely more in South America, but we had also traveled quite a bit over in Europe. So I did have a lot of access to, different parasites, different bacteria across the world. I stayed with indigenous cultures. I definitely stepped outside of what my body and, immune system was capable and familiar with, for sure. I was, forced onto vaccinations depending on where I traveled, like your yellow fever card and, hepatitis A and B. A lot of them were suggested depending on which areas I was traveling to. But I think the abundance of vaccinations over the course of those 4 or 5 years just wreaked havoc on my immune system. But I did get a chance to experience different life in different cultures around the world for sure.
And were there any particular food elements or nutrition elements from those different cultures that you've now adopted and use in your day-to-day life?
Yes, complete whole foods. When I stayed with the indigenous cultures, if they didn't raise it or grow it, they weren't eating it. It was on the occasion they would, go, take a 4-hour ride in a canoe to the local city to buy a cake for their 1-year-old, if the kid's birthday. But that was the extent of their processed food. Anything else that they were eating was just whole and grown by them or raised by them or hunted by them. One of the most fascinating things was staying with them was they had hunted a tapir. They threw it over a smoke fire because they didn't have access to energy. So there was no power on this facility. So how do you hunt something and keep it preserved without cold temperature regulation? They basically threw it over a fire and smoke and just would rotate it every single day. And then they would just sliver pieces off it little by little as they needed it. So they basically cooked this animal it had to be 6 weeks, 7 weeks by the time I got there. And then the best part was once they were done with all the meat products, they would take all the smoked bones and they would just boil them in water over fire and just dip through that on the occasion to get all the nutrients and benefits from the bones of that animal. So this animal that they hunted literally extended for 3 months into their family of 30. So a very long nose to tail practice that, modern day has kind of drifted away from.
So speaking of that bone broth, that's a huge part of your company, Bone In Foods. So what about bone broth are the benefits that you find most exciting?
So the benefits are the collagen content, the healthy fat content, the fact that you're using an animal to its complete, nose to tail philosophy where nothing goes to waste. There are ample benefits to bone broths if someone doesn't have a histamine intolerance. So I reap the benefits from it because I had an autoimmune disorder and I have no issues with histamine. The collagen was helping with my inflammation in my joints, the discomfort that I was waking up to every morning. Now, this was also in a transition from a prednisone and prescription, which was also assisting me at that time. But the benefits of bone broth, between vitamins, minerals, fat, collagen, there's really no comparison on the market in terms of a superfood nutritionally, because they do contain all 21 essential amino acids, which means, if it's there's 8 essential amino acids that our body doesn't naturally produce that we need to get from an outside source, and you can get them all for bone broths. For those that have a histamine intolerance, I have noticed that there is a better acceptance from it when it's turned into a soup or a stew, because you're kind of fulfilling that amino acid complexity better, so it's easier digested and more bioavailable.
And so then, did the benefits that you found from consuming bone broth with your diagnosis play a role in the conception of Bone In Foods?
It totally did. When I started researching nutrition and I had learned after my experiences traveling the benefits of these nose to tail philosophy and getting all your essential amino acids and the influence it has on your immune system, I really started to just streamline a whole food diet per se. So I went complete 180 from processed eating out to only cooking in every day with my wife and trying to use every part of the animal from where we were sourcing it. This was a difficult transition, and I did use the more common markets we're familiar with before actually finding farmers and going direct to them so that I can be see complete transparency on how these animals are raised. So, between the bone broths and just eating a whole food diet, it substantially changed my health.
So what are the guiding principles behind your brand?
So it's basically just taking ancestral wisdom and applying it to what we have available today in modern day. Modern day food systems, were available and they were convenient at a big transition in our evolution to more community organized environments versus kind of being widespread and being in our own indigenous primitive culture. So modern day definitely helped in being able to supply people with the food that they needed. It's the issue is that it's not the food anymore. It's the nutritional starvation, the nutritional degradation that we're going through now, where we're not eating complete whole foods, but instead our diet is predominantly highly processed food. So that transition and those guidelines kind of play a part into bone-in foods. Like, how can we take what's already been modernized and bring it back to an ancestral mindset where animals are raised more naturally? There's not a lot of human interaction. They're influencing the health of the soil and the health of the land, which then also influences the health of the vegetables and the produce and the fruit that we eat. How do we streamline that to be more intimate in our community so that there is complete transparency and there's more confidence and people are more comfortable in the food decisions that they're making? But also, how do we make that abundant enough where we can start to eliminate our need for a modern day industrial food practice and farming practice? So our guidelines are really clean, whole food, complete transparency, and direct to consumer, so as fresh as they can be, because the fresher these ingredients are, the more nutritious they are.
Now, as I'm sure you've experienced yourself in your journey, it's not always easy in our convenient modern day society to get all of those qualities in a single item. So do you have any tips for people on how to start making these changes in their own lives and transition from our current convenient-based lives to more of this thought-out, planned, and resourceful style?
Yeah, that's a question I get asked a lot from our buyers, because a lot of our buyers are in the inner city. So how do you make this transition when you're in a less rural, area, where you have the acreage and the ability to grow, and you have neighbors who have the ability to grow? And so that's why we started Bone In, a farm to door delivery service, because we were trying to make that easily convenient and accessible for those living in more urban areas. What I can say is that, we do have the ability to grow indoors. We do have the ability to, change our infrastructure so that certain buildings begin thinking more sustainably. I'm actually seeing it in Jersey City, where they're discussing rooftop gardens and trying to create more of a community base just in those buildings. Straightforward. It's just it's not expedited, and it's not in every developer's plan. So people, I think, especially in the more urban areas, they just need to find their sources, figure out where their sources, visit farmers markets, try to eat as seasonally as possible. If you can't, there are markets that they can shop at, that they can go to. And then try to grow some of your basics. If you have to do it indoors, growing herbs, like a rosemary or thyme, something to spice up your food is a great start. There are ways to grow in these areas. My wife and I lived in, a more low income area of Jersey City for a period in our transition. And, in the backyard, which was just a dump, I completely cleaned it up. I didn't own the property, but I completely cleaned it up and grew tomatoes and food for some of the people on my block. So that's always a practice that people can do. And I tell you, some of the neighbors would be willing to pay for that.
And now for your condition, inflammation is a big part of it. And we know that a lot of chronic conditions have a tie to inflammation. Now, and so the gut's ability to digest food and absorb the nutrients can play a role in how much inflammation you get and kind of the sources of it and all of that. So how do bone-in foods support gut health and help to address that concern?
So that's a very broad question because it actually all starts in the soil. The healthier that I'm an environmentalist out of college. I studied soil science, and now I'm big into nutrition and just the similarities I see in our systems, because we're all interrelated. The way that these systems work for the biodiversity in our soil and the health of the biome in our soil is very similar to the way that our human bodies function, and every animal functions at that matter. The healthier your soil, the more nutritious the plants, the more nutritious the animals that feed on those plants are going to be for you, and the more influential they will be on the health of your biome. Fermentation is a fantastic practice to influence gut health. Bone broth, because of the collagen, help with the health of your gut lining, which allow the microvilli in your gut to absorb more from the foods that they're eating, that they're digesting. It's kind of thinking about it in different scales, from small ecosystems within your gut to small ecosystems within your soil. So the whole idea, the whole premise is like, how do we, if we're concentrating all of the, on the health of our soil and our land, essentially all the food that is produced from there is also going to be beneficial to us and easier and more digestible. For some people who have a more intolerable gut lining or microbiome, they may have to take this transition, but there's going to be a transitional period that's going to be difficult for them because their gut systems have been so aligned with our modern day practice. That was actually the case for me. Even though I felt great eating the whole foods and that transition, there were certain foods that I couldn't tolerate as well as I can today. Now 6 years into this business and into eating in this way and this lifestyle change. For instance, alkaloids in tomatoes. I had a really hard time with nightshade vegetables, and now I can tolerate them in minor doses. So it's really paying attention to your body and feeling how everything you ingest affects you, because at the end of the day, every cell in your body is derived from what you're ingesting through food, what you're ingesting through your environment, through toxins, through breathing. So it's really streamlining, since we know the importance of a healthy gut. How can I make my gut healthy? What probiotics, what benefits, what microbes can I feed my gut to allow me to absorb foods better and digest better and get most nutritional availability from what I'm eating?
Now, one of the criticisms that happen a lot or come up a lot with eating organic, whole food, locally sourced, etc., is that it can become quite costly. Many of us have a budget, and so it's not always feasible to go 100% organic, non-GMO, locally grown. Do you have any tips on how to extend that budget as you're making the transition?
Yeah, for sure. So nose to tail is the best the best idea that I can share, because you can get ample benefits from bones, which you can buy from a local farmer for very little. Most farmers, regenerative farmers, organic farmers I hate to say it, but they actually throw away a lot of their bones because they have no home for them. They have no place to bring them. So we're just discarding animal bones when there's so much that can be produced from them, just as a base to a soup or a stew, or just something to sip on. In the case of your stomach indigestion, there's so many benefits that you can get from the bones. And then the less familiar cuts are actually the most nutritious. So organ meats, liver, kidneys, a lot of people don't like these things. Between you and I, Cassie, I actually eat them raw. I don't even cook them, only because I trust the source that they're coming from. It'd be a different story if it was the other way around. But these are practices that we have evolved from, and we need to evolve too. And once we start to make that transition, you'd be quite surprised. And once we're cooking more, because a lot of people say they don't have it in their budget, but most of the time we're eating out 2 or 3 times a week. And I would say that's probably the average. I'm pretty sure I read that somewhere. When you're eating out, you're spending not just for the food, but you're also spending the time for labor, the time for their infrastructure, and we all want to eat out. My wife and I still try to eat out once in a while, but we cook 3 meals a day for, my family, for our family. And I'll tell you what, we spend maybe $200 a week working with local regenerative farmers and feeding ourselves 3 times a week. There's also the conversation of portion control. Like we eat way too much as a society than we used to. If we're going to look back at ancestral wisdom, these people used to eat 1 big meal a day. Now we have 3 courses throughout the day. They used to eat 1 big meal a day maybe every 2 days, and then just feed or snack on fruits, berries, and whatever they can forage. So it's really it's really shifting our patterns from what we know and looking back into ancestral wisdom and saying, like, we really should be using each and every part of this animal. We really should be minimizing our portions based off how we feel and the energies that it provides us. And we need to prioritize our budget. I think in this country, in the United States, I think food is 5th on our priority list in terms of where we budget our money, and it should be number 1. And I think with that slight transition, we can eventually shift the entire paradigm that surrounds our food system.
That's very fascinating. And it makes sense. There's a lot of talk about like paleo diet and all these different, getting back to our roots and stuff. But it is true that when you start to kind of reposition how we're looking at where we're spending that budget, what we're prioritizing over, the nutrients, maybe, like you said, getting the convenience of someone else doing the labor for us and stuff like that, it can definitely change the way you spread your budget. So I think that's a good point to bring up. Now, your website is boneinfood.com, and there people can purchase a variety of different items from the different collections like bone broth, meat, produce, etc. Is there a specific area that you and your company service?
So yeah, we service all of New Jersey. We just opened up into New York and parts of the Pennsylvania area, mostly along the borders of the state of New Jersey. We really are trying to make it streamlined and direct to consumer and as fresh as possible. So we have to minimize our overhead internally. We don't have big trucks on the road. This is all like personal drivers basically coming to the farm where we're packing. Farmers are bringing to us in the morning. We're packing everything fresh. Drivers come, pick everything up, and then disperse it. But we'll have about 5 drivers on the road, with their cars or their SUVs full of orders for people in the area. And we try to do that twice a week currently. When the pandemic hit, we ran into a sourcing issue because a lot of our farmers, like the high demand and the transition for better quality food, because people all of a sudden were very concerned about their immune systems, as they should be. We ran into a supply shortage. So based off the criteria that Bone In is trying to meet. So we have branched out, we have met new farmers, and now we have farmers reaching out to us to help in their distribution and the marketing of these things. So it's really trying to streamline direct to consumer. So things are being harvested in the morning and at your door by the middle of the afternoon. They're not sitting in refrigeration. They're not sitting in a warehouse. These things are coming direct from the farm, direct to us, packaged, and then direct to you. It's been quite an experience trying to work with those logistics, especially when the pandemic hit. But yeah, it's definitely working out, and we're excited for it.
That's very cool. I can imagine you've had some headaches over the last couple of years here with everything that's been going on, but it's a great premise. I think that's really cool to help people source that farm to table kind of food. For people that are not in your immediate service area, do you have resources for them to start educating themselves and creating these relationships on their own in their local area?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I've been noticing a lot of businesses similar to mine, especially since the pandemic hit, that are beginning to pop up in different areas. Like I had a woman from Chicago reach out and ask if we can ship. And in my mind, I'm like, I don't feel comfortable shipping a bag of vegetables and a box of meat to you. There's other companies doing that, but obviously they're importing and exporting meats all from around the world. When we're talking about, carbon footprints, I think those things do need to be minimalized, and they do need to be more direct to consumer, especially when we're talking about the level of the complexity of the food system that we need to adapt for, future sustainability purposes. So I basically just did a farm to door delivery search in Chicago, and 2 options popped up, and I suggested them to her and said, I don't know how good their practices are, or I don't know the details of it, but they do exist. It's there. And there's also a lot of online sources. There's a site called eatwild.com that people can check, because they can find the local farmers in their area that are practicing either regenerative agriculture or organic agriculture. And then just read a lot of reading. There's some great books by Joel Salatin, who's a farmer down in Virginia. We read a lot of nutritional books to just kind of get you on a guideline, like Sally Fallon, Weston A. Price Foundation. She's fantastic. She discusses the nutritional science and how it relates to ancestral wisdom. So you can kind of gain an idea on where our systems shifted and when, and how we can get back to that system. She discusses a lot of preservation and fermentation, as I had mentioned to you, which are ways to kind of extend the period and length of something that we're growing or something that we hunted, so that we can get all the benefits from that animal at a more effective, affordable price.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to share all of your knowledge and your experience and where that's got you so far with me today. I really appreciate it. And I think there's a lot of information here that our listeners can use to start their own sustainable whole food diet if they choose. So thank you so much.
No, thank you. I appreciate you having me.
Thank you for listening to Supplementing Health. For more information about our guests, past shows, and future topics, please visit aor.ca/podcast or aor.us/podcast. Do you have a topic you want us to cover? We invite you to engage with us on social media to request a future topic, or email us at marketing@aor.ca.